Hey there, John.
So, Glenn, how are you doing?
Very good indeed.
Yeah. Well, you said in one of our earlier logging heads that one ought to look at the comments that people make. And you actually have me paying more attention to comments now than I ever have before. And one of the comments on one of our last ones was somebody who said that you and I need to stop talking about the weather at the beginning of ours. And so maybe we can heed that, and we can both admit that it's summer and it's too hot, and then kind of jump right in.
The comment suggested that we do start by talking about the weather?
That we not start
by... Okay, yeah, right. Let's get right down to business, is that it?
That's right. That's what he said, and I think I know what he means, or she means, so, yeah.
Okay, well, let's get right down to business then, John. Nobody's got any time to waste out there in blogging land.
That's right.
We're at no shortage for things to talk about, I should think.
Stuff has kept happening, hasn't it? I think we've got cut his nuts off. That happened. And I've heard that he actually said something else before that didn't get.
Well, I want to hear. Give me all the gossip. What else did he say?
Apparently, before that there was the N-word, and so which you can imagine. He certainly didn't say that gentleman's nuts. And apparently there was some sentence before that where he referred to Mr. Obama with the dirty little 6 letters, and then came the nuts. And so that was
I'm sorry,
kind of
6 letters, dirty little 6 letters.
Yeah, nigger, those letters.
The N-word. Are we? By the way, I don't know what the etiquette or the protocol is on.
I suspect that the protocol is that we can say it.
Oh, because we're black.
That's the usual media thing.
Nigga, all right. Yeah.
And if it isn't, maybe they can bleep us. But I think as long as we use it with taste. And so,
So there was this big blow up on The View. I mean, I know this is cable TV land, but I heard about this on MSNBC that apparently some of the guests on The View, the popular women's talk show, public affairs, whatever, Barbara Walters, whatever, Whoopi Goldberg. Mm-hmm. And she gets into a verbal tussle with one of the other guests, whose name I don't recall, but it is
Elizabeth
over the end where the other guest, a white
yeah.
woman, had expressed that she, was very hurt by the use of that word and blah, blah, blah. And Whoopi...
she started crying, right?
Yeah, there was some crying that went on in it. But it was very intense, and, all of this, who has the right to say what, and whether or not we understand each other... And are there things about being black or about blacks together or something that whites just can't enter into? And can blacks use that word in ways but white people can't use it, and things, all of this kind of stuff, which I thought was pretty interesting.
That's extremely interesting because, that word is being used very fluently by a lot of white and Latino and Asian young men in particular. Here in New York, I hear it used by them to talk to each other, to talk about each other within the group. And I'm not sure how much policing we can really do. So it's one thing for someone to say, we can use it, but you can't. That sounds good. But then if you actually walk down any city street and listen to who already is using it, who probably doesn't watch The View and they don't read The New Republic and they don't watch blogging heads, then I'm wondering what the discussion is really about at this point.
It's perplexing.
It looks to me like everybody's using it.
Randall Kennedy wrote a whole book about this. Did you ever?
I remember.
Yeah.
Yeah. I reviewed it, and I think he was correct. We have to revel in how widespread, especially nigga, it's the N-I-G-G-A.
Yeah, with the A. Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, kind of a different word. I don't think we can control it. Do you?
No, and I don't think we should. I mean, I do think that just like any word, I can imagine a situation where, I don't know, I'm racing for the parking space, the other guy's racing for the parking space. I'm black, the other guy's white. I get to the parking space first, and he drives by and yells out his car, the N-word at me. And I don't know, he surrounds it with some other adjectives and adverbs or whatnot.
Right.
But the basic thing is, it's meant to be a cutting insult, and it's a kind of racial play that I'm unwilling to accept, an affront to my dignity or something. And so a fight starts. Whereas if the guy is black and he says exactly the same thing, the tonality could be exactly the same, and yet the meaning for me would be different.
Completely different.
I wouldn't assume the same racial motive or animus in race, rooted in race, at the base of the motive. And so we may not progress to fisticuffs in that situation. So So, I mean, you're the linguist, right? I mean, words have meanings that depend on context and other surrounding circumstances, right? They don't have meanings in and of themselves, right? I mean...
Yeah, and like what's challenging about this word is that even though we all know that on a certain level, this is one where the line is drawn in terms of race, and at a time in the United States when race is a very ambiguous, challenging, and ever-shifting category. Then you've got that issue of pronunciation as well.
Yeah.
And so nigger is not warm, if you pronounce it that way. Nigger can be, depending on who's saying it and how they say it and the intonation. That's a new thing. It's interesting. There are other books that could be written about it.
This is a hip-hop nation phenomenon, do you think? This
helps. That definitely helps. The word, I think you can say, and I've never been quite sure, because, with all due respect, you have lived longer, and I was a child, I think, when a lot of it was changing. The word is more common now than it was in the 70s. I don't think people were saying it as much when I was 10 as they are now when I'm 42. Do you sense a change?
Well, black people always said this word, in my experience. The word was very widely used, and when I was coming up, it was used as a term of endearment, as a term of fraternity, also as a term of condemnation. Niggas ain't shit. Excuse me, blogging at TV, but that was just widely said by black people. Niggas ain't shit.
Right.
Anytime somebody messed up, that it would often get related in terms of some kind of generic stereotyping.
Whenever you get a bunch of niggers together,
they ain't going to add up to anything. Blah blah blah.
Right.
But it was also said as my nigga. And that nigga knows how to do economics or whatever the thing might be. And it would be a kind of buddy, a kind of closeness of one of our fraternity. A way of I don't know, signaling intimacy or something.
Now, you see, I'm glad you're saying that, because ever since really Randall's book, and my goodness, that goes back to, I think, 2001 at this point.
It's at least 5 years.
Ever since his book, there's been these constant discussions, like I imagine Whoopi has now started a new one, about this word. And there's always this implication that there's something new afoot, that either rap music did it, or that something happened with our youth, and so they're using it more. And I've always said, you can find people using the word that way in 1901. And I've always been wondering, has there been a change in the frequency? And from what you're saying, no. Within black culture, the word was already established in exactly its meaning today in the 50s. That's what you're saying. That's
my memory,
right?
yeah. At least, maybe probably going way back before then, too,
Yeah,
but anyway, so he used the N-word, and he also talked about castration, and that's gotten a lot. That is, Jesse Jackson did in reference to Barack Obama. That's gotten a lot of play in the press.
And what's interesting is that in our last blogging hits, where I had some technical problems, and so I couldn't pay full attention near the end because I was afraid my camera was going to blow up. But you were saying that you didn't approve of Obama's Father's Day speech, and you would never use this terminology that Jesse Jackson was using, but in light of that you think Barack Obama was engaged on an idle conquest to change a culture by preaching and saying you must change rather than setting up the conditions wherein a person might change. How do you feel about, I know you wouldn't talk about somebody's nuts on television, but how do you feel about Jesse Jackson's sentiment here?
Well, okay, my problem with the speech, and I don't want to rehash this too much because as Barack Obama has said to the NAACP, he's going to keep on giving the speech.
I like that.
Yeah, I know. I have to admire that. I think that's the thing to say. Barack Obama's an estimable figure here, and he's playing this very, very well, in my opinion. And so, there's not any point in me, quote, being against the speech, close quote, but let me tell you what a couple of my concerns were, just to reiterate. And one was about policy, and the other was about politics. About policy, I'm skeptical of the power and significance of speeches to actually change culture. So the bully pulpit is not nothing, and Barack Obama's got it, but its effects can be overestimated, and so I'm always asking, where's the beef, what's the bottom line, and so forth. And as I said, and I don't want to, repeat myself too much, just to say, there were some concrete policy things in Barack Obama's Father's Day speech that I thought merited consideration, including this idea of nurses I mean, he's reiterated, Obama has that, okay, I'm talking to black people about responsibility, but I recognize also there are social responsibilities, there are public responsibilities.
Precisely.
And one of those
Right.
would be trying to support families by giving medical and just general public health and child raising advice at a professional level to new moms, especially those who are indigent, might be single moms, poor, inner city, whatever. Nurses coming to the home to visit on a frequent basis after a newborn is taken from the hospital, caring through the first couple of years of life, and followed up with some robust preschool might do a lot for the development of young people in inner city communities and so forth and so on. So that was one of the things. He also talked about child support stuff. I'm not going to go into all the details, but so I've looked so at the policy. At the political level, I was a little troubled by, and I think Jackson, I share this with Jackson, the kind of black people becoming a prop in a campaign aimed at middle America to try to persuade them that I'm okay, I'm one of you, I'm a good guy, I'm a leader. Okay, and so it's a little bit of kind of standing on the south side of Chicago, which nurtured you, but which now you can't seem to be anything other than in opposition to as you construct your narrative for the American people. Your narrative is constructed not as a son of the soil of black community, south side of Chicago, and so forth. And so not so much that as it is for America. Look, you see the deviancy, you see the perversity, you see the departure from our values, wink, wink. Well, here I am, a leader, not a black leader, who's prepared, who is black, who's prepared to say to black people what it is that you've been wanting to say to them all these years. And winning over the endorsement of whites by, in a way, Jesse Jackson called it talking down to, and I'm saying standing on, you know, but using them as props, you know, setting them out, and then defining oneself in opposition to them. And again, as I say, after for so much of one's career having been nurtured and supported. But I mean, I tell you, I just can't get over the idea that Barack Obama can't go back to that church. The reason that hurts me and disturbs me so is that I can imagine what a tremendous boost of pride, a kind of boon, a sense of importance to this church in the middle of the African American community on the south side of Chicago. What you know, we have arrived. We are running America. We are, you know, 1 degree of separation from the most powerful man on the planet. Right? Ours, nurtured it, produced here, grew up here, took its roots right here. Watched that baby in diapers. Now it's the 9-year-old going to the White House. That lady, that's the first lady of America. That's our lady. This kind of thing. Stripped away from that church. They deserve better than that. I'm not blaming Obama. Okay, if I got to blame somebody, maybe I could blame Jeremiah Wright. But you're asking me what my problem is, and I'm telling you that the problem that I have here has to do with a kind of negative honor that is accruing to some aspects of the black experience through Obama's quest for the presidency, because to define himself as acceptable to America, he has to define himself to a certain degree in opposition to this community, or at least so it seems to me.
Well, you know something, I would agree with the views you're expressing. I would feel that way too, except for the inconvenient fact that black audiences eat this up so much. And so what you're saying coheres perfectly to me, and it's the way I would feel if Obama were making these speeches and black audiences were walking out mumbling, well, he had some nice things to say, but I'm not sure. But instead, they're going crazy. They're mobbing him in the lobby afterwards. And so they seem to like it. And one thing that I'm very sensitive about is, since we're told so often how vigilant we have to be about not stereotyping and about respecting the views of the disenfranchised, I don't want to condescend to those people that somehow they're hearing a message which they don't truly understand. And, you know, even on the subject of Jackson, you know, I get asked all the time to trash that poor man. And I refrain because I think it's overly simplistic. And it's interesting. It's so much fun to make a cartoon out of somebody and to tell stupid stories. But I've met the man a couple of times briefly. And all, you know, on it in a green room on a TV show. And here comes this person, and you shake his hand, and he's a human being, and you can see that he's not this idiot that people make him out to be. And so I'm very chary of, you know, participating in that business of demonizing him, because he's imperfect, but then so certainly am I. But the fact of the matter is that this cut off the nuts thing was kind of symbolic. I think the clip is going to keep being run. Because during the time that we've been having these conversations, I think that we're really seeing a cultural shift. And what we're seeing is an increasing comfort, not with the idea that black people need to be told to shape up, but that it's both things. You know, it's racism on the one hand, and so we had the New York Times bringing out their poll last week about how most black Americans are still very concerned about racism.
Yes, I saw that.
But then on the other hand, that everybody knows that that is not the whole meal, and that maybe there's an emerging consensus that it runs about down the middle. And it's not only Obama, it's Cosby, it's the fact that he's going around the country. It's not just one speech, it's Cosby's book. It's Medea, it's Tyler Perry and these wonderfully silly and yet bizarrely deep stage comedies and the movies that are being made from him. Medea, that character, is a black conservative. If you listen to her advice that she gives at the end of the stage plays or throughout these movies, there's a very T.D. Jakes conservative kind of message.
Yeah.
And black America's eating it up. I hear something about Medea very often when I go to the barbershop. You know, in the barbershop, there's a ladies' barbershop in the same room. And you listen to those women talking. Medea is now an icon. And you know something, in terms of how to change a culture, and although we do have to be vigilant, nobody should be getting up and hectoring people, and you'd know if people felt hectored. This is something that I think is always important. And I guess this was my crucible. The way for a lot of people, the crucible was things that happened in the 60s. It was welfare reform and its effects. And I think that culture often changes just as a kind of a domino effect. And so the most interesting thing about welfare reform after 96 was that it went down in many states where really there weren't that many efforts to change the system. And so in some states they made all of these changes, and so of course the welfare rolls just dropped because people just couldn't be on it. Then there were other states where the welfare rolls just kind of dropped because there was a new fashion in the bureaucracy. There was a new fashion among black mothers to start taking different tacks from the ones that they had been taking before. That happened as the result of a stimulus. So I think that a culture can change as the result of someone preaching, as long as there are other things being put in place to allow the dominoes to start
John,
to fall.
you've said a lot of things. I'm not even going to be able to remember all the points that I want to respond to. Jesse Jackson's cutting off the nuts thing, the popularity of Obama's message with black people, and now you're saying something about welfare reform. Let me just start at the end. I don't know that the culture in the public housing projects and densely populated tenement, low-income urban districts, the 98% black Central City high schools, the nightclubs where the 18 and 20 and 22-year-olds hang out and pick up. I don't know that that culture has changed that much. I don't know that the statistics about out-of-wedlock births or premarital sex or durability of marriage or proclivity to marry amongst African Americans has changed much since 1996. I doubt seriously that it has done. So I'm wondering whether you can fairly say that welfare reform has changed the culture. I know that it's certainly changed the incentives for people who were in the part of society where they might be drawing on welfare, and it probably has had some beneficial effects in terms of encouraging work. It certainly has reduced the welfare rolls. But
that's all I mean.
But in any case, so we can agree to disagree to the extent that we disagree about that. On the question of black people endorsing what Obama said in Chicago on Father's Day, well, yes, we have been doing so for some time. I feel like I can say this because, and forgive me, you know this, 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, I was writing essays that were saying things not entirely unlike the things that Barack Obama said in that church.
Of course,
I got vilified for saying them, of course, and I wasn't alone, but the few of us who were saying them with any prominence were getting vilified for it. But one of the arguments that I always made was, go to one of these churches and listen to what's being preached on a Sunday by these Pentecostal or Baptist or AME African-American ministers who are preaching about sexuality and marriage and family and responsibility and so forth, and they're preaching this gospel. And therefore, don't be so hard, on somebody who's prepared to say this. And of course, the issue always was washing dirty linen in public, political effect of saying it to white people. It takes away the argument that there's social responsibility and so on. But it's been around for a long time. The reason I think people are mobbing Jesse Jackson, people are mobbing Barack Obama in the lobby after he gives an address to the NAACP. The reason I think that they're doing that is because he can become president of the United States. You know what I'm saying? I mean, in other words, he's got a really, really good chance of winning. So, whereas the political effect of a black conservative, a Glenn Loury or a Clarence Thomas, or a Thomas Sowell or a Shelby Steele or a John McWhorter, for that matter, no offense intended, the political effect of such a person standing up in the midst of, I don't know what, Bill Clinton's reign, or the height of the Reagan era, or, you know, whatever, and saying that would be read very, very differently than now. And I think the thing is, we think, or many African Americans think, well, yeah, what he's saying is true. It's been true for a long time, and it needs saying, but we're not afraid of him saying it, because we think that it's in the service of something of a larger importance that people are prepared to get behind, something like that. Putting it in the proper political as well as cultural context is what I'm recommending.
You know, something else, though, I think that it's not only that he could become president. I think more key is that you mentioned that this sort of thing is said in church. It's the method of delivery. And in terms of, I did not see you giving talks back in that era, because I was still, you know, I was in college.
John, you're making me feel old, but go ahead. I am old, I know.
I read you, but I didn't see you. And so Clarence Thomas, Tom Sowell, Shelby Steele, John McWhorter, to the extent that I fit into that group, Ward Connolly, all of those people are ones who do not talk like preachers. And that is a very articulate way to talk if you're going to talk to a black audience. We don't have that cadence. We are not especially warm when we give talks. And notice I'm saying we. You know, that's just not how I come off. I'm warm to people I know. And I think that there could be, like, your Roland could be one of these people if he were interested in doing that kind of thing. I don't think that he is. But Roland Fryer, the Harvard economist, black Harvard economist, somebody who was going to take a quote-unquote black conservative line, who was not running for president, but was a professor or something, who could get up and use the good morning everybody cadence and say things like any fool can make a child and make it sound like a caress the way Obama can. That person could become a very well-known conservative public black intellectual, and black audiences would eat them up and everybody would be very confused. It just happens that that person hasn't come along, maybe just because of the luck of the numbers. I wish someone would. I must admit, I kind of was hoping that, you know, for about 10 seconds, people were saying about Roland that he's going to take the place of John McWhorter, whatever John McWhorter was doing or is doing. And I thought, good, because he can connect to an audience in a way that I will never be able to, and I admired it. So who knows? That person could come along. They don't have to
You're
be
making an important point, I think, John, about the style and about the verbal virtuosity, about being able to connect, about intimacy and trust in public communication. And I think you're right. And I think you're right about Obama's artful delivery. That speech in that church in Chicago was masterful. I mean, I watched the thing on YouTube several times because I was just taken by, you know, it was entertaining. And it was also impressive. You could learn from it. And I think you're right about the young Roland Fryer. I mean, he's 32 or something like that. He's got a future ahead of him. I hope he finishes his scientific career before he leaps into politics, but I wouldn't rule out one of these days seeing him, you know, doing something other than writing scholarly papers. And
audiences eat him up.
He's masterful. But I want to also go back to Jesse Jackson, because I know Jesse. Jesse's a friend of mine.
He is?
Well, you know, not a bosom buddy, but I mean, we old codgers have been around together a long time. We had a lot of green rooms that we could bump into each other.
Mean stuff about him. Okay, yeah.
I first met Jesse Jackson person to person in 1986 on one of these Bill Moyers programs that was a special on the black family. That is really, I thought it was a very important piece of television journalism at the time that it was done, because Bill Moyer stuck his neck out by exposing the wholesale irresponsibility of many young black men, and by really forcing a national conversation about some of these issues that we're talking about.
Was Julian Bond on this?
I don't think Julian was on that. What I remember was the woman who's represents the District of Columbia in the House. The delegate from the District of Columbia, Eleanor Holmes Norton.
Eleanor
she was
Holmes
on it.
Norton,
I don't remember that Julian Bond was, at least not on the roundtable segment.
I'm remembering something else.
for that program. But it was a 2-hour special by Moyers that was done at that time. Anyway, that was my first meeting of Jesse Jackson. I've been with him on a number of occasions since, including.
Is that the one where you kind of made up with him?
No. That was later. That was after 9/11. That was much later. But enough about me. What I want to say is that I feel sorry for Jesse Jackson in a certain way, and I think this may have been what kind of you were trying to get out for me. I mean, it's not like I'm going to defend the cut off the nut statement. No. And it's certainly not like I'm going to defend the career, because I think the career has been very disappointing. Jesse Jackson ran for president in 1984 and 1988, as you know. Run, Jesse, run. That was the slogan. This was around the same time that Harold Washington was getting himself elected mayor of Chicago. And there was a sense of something in a kind of political upsurge. Now, I was against all of this because I was very conservative, and I was very skeptical about Jackson's run, cynical runs for the White House, manipulating the media and all about projecting self and no real politics down underneath it, and overstating how much he was going to change the Democratic Party by bringing people in. But let me just observe that the model that Jesse Jackson laid down in 1984 and 1988 does seem to me to have something to do with at least one part of Barack Obama's success, which is, the black candidate for president who's excited the black community. Now, not just the black community, to be sure. He wouldn't be the candidate that he is if it were only the black community. But it seemed to me that Jesse Jackson's complicated, ambiguous, kind of ambivalent is what I want to say. There's just more than one aspect to it. Career. But Jesse Jackson was never able to sit in the same place long enough. He should have run for mayor of Chicago, or he should have run for the Senate from Illinois, or should have run for the mayor of the District of Columbia, which he could have done. He didn't. Maybe he didn't want to work hard enough. Too much chasing the camera around, enamored of his own celebrity. I don't know what the critique. It's kind of unfair. It's Monday morning quarterbacking. But anyway, what I want to say is, I still have a sense of grudging admiration for Jesse Jackson's role, including all of this. Not including. Let me be clear. He was hustling money from these corporations, sort of blackmailing them, extorting. He was hooking up deals with his law firm and accounting firm friends to get them businesses, black vendors with major,
and defending it.
Kickback.
He and his son wrote a whole book about
and stuff. Yeah. So no, I can't defend any of that, and yet still Jesse Jackson has a kind of warm. So, and therefore, a warm place in my heart is what I'm saying. Therefore, it was really sad to see him implode. To see the obvious end of his relevancy forced into his face with such vehemence. His son coming out within, minutes with a kind of devastating rebuke. And Jackson having to tuck his tail between his legs, issue an apology, and then put his head down and hope the thing would blow over.
The saddest thing about people like him, and he's a type, is that to become prominent and often to do good things, to get to the point that you can actually have the levers of power at your disposal so you can do good things, you often have to have a serious ego. When you read about famous people, one thing that is almost a refrain, particularly with famous men, is that they did not have actual close friends, that they had a bunch of warm acquaintances. You see that again and again. And Jackson was, when he started out, I think he wanted to do some good things. You can see newsreel footage of him in the early 70s saying some things to black audiences that sound kind of like the Father's Day speech when he had the big afro. He had sense. And then as time went on, he got drunk on the power. Adam Clayton Powell Jr. is the same thing. You can see him doing wonderful things in the 30s and the 40s, leading boycotts that actually work, putting himself on the line. By the 1960s, he's wearing black clothes and pretending to be a black power activist and getting in trouble in Congress and sleeping around and not paying his taxes because he was really into himself. It's a type, and it's a type that goes across races. It goes throughout history. It's a shame that Jackson turned into that, and it would be very sad to see, for example, Barack Obama be that. You get the feeling he wouldn't, and I think that's part of what his appeal is, that he really does seem like he's something new. But
I hear you, and I'm not going to disagree with anything you said about Powell. That's he's an iconic case, to be sure, New York and all of that, but I can't disagree with anything that you said. I'm just remembering some of those phrases from the 70s. Down with dope, up with hope. This is Jesse Jackson. Nobody can save us from us but us. Keep Hope
example,
Alive.
Right.
What was I Am Somebody? He led him in that chant. You know, he'd have the whole high school audience standing up. This was on into the 80s. He was doing this. So, yes.
That was his original self. And next thing you know, he's in a suit shaking down corporations and saying things about Obama and, you know, the love child scandal. And it's just he got caught up in himself. And that's what powerful, especially men and sometimes women, often do. And so you just hope that they'll get some good stuff done within their first 15 years or so. Because you can almost count on there being these sorts of implosions as time goes on. And when that's not true, when it's like, say, Teddy Kennedy, they don't tend to be people who are extremely prominent and powerful and bestriding the stage. They are solid background operators. He doesn't seem to have that kind of ego, and therefore he's not a rock star. And it's a shame. You have to watch out for
So
those
let me ask you
rock stars.
something. I mean, I am in awe of the completeness with which Barack Obama has taken control of the black political agenda at the national level. That is to say, you know, we're talking about the marginalization of Jesse Jackson here, and we could include some others in it, you know, Al Sharpton and others. CNN has been doing this special on race, and I don't want to criticize anybody, you know, I don't want to go there, but I just want to say, when I viewed it and I saw some of those familiar faces, like I saw Cornel West's visage sitting in the front row during one of the roundtables, and he must have been on camera at another time, which I didn't see, but he was certainly present prominently at the thing. Yeah, I just had this eerie, kind of strange feeling that that it was kind of like an anachronism. I mean, I could hear Cornel's, and again, with due respect, I mean, I really do admire Cornel West at many levels, so it's not a cheap shot, but I could just hear his tone, you know, his posture, I could see his body language, and I could hear the preaching kind of rhetoric that he's inclined to about white supremacy and, hegemonic discourses and all this kind of postmodernist talk. And I thought, the thought that crossed my mind just by looking at his face was, how irrelevant. You know, how quickly it's become a period piece. You know.
And look at the color of Cornel West's hair. You know, it's becoming a generational
watch out,
thing.
Man. Watch out.
Well.
I'm looking at the color of my beard right now. Okay, so just lighten up. But at least I'm fast on my feet. At least I like to think so, you know.
You are fast on your feet.
I'm not saying the same
you're
stuff
still
I was saying
thinking.
20 years ago.
It's true. Not at all. But, you know, most people do. That's the thing. Most people have their one little thing, even very smart people.
But
so
it's
that's
a
what we're seeing.
testimony to how sort of weak and thin on the ground the post-civil rights leadership were/are, that they could be so, with such stunning rapidity, kind of moved to the side and made into subjects of history, but sort of no longer really... The Congressional Black Caucus, again, with due respect, okay? With due respect for people, you know, and we could name the names, starting with Congressman Rangel, Chairman of Ways and Means, going on down. And, you know, I don't mean any disrespect to these people. But I'm saying, you know, somehow the Congressional Black Caucus is a little bit less interesting. You know? I mean, I'm not worried about what they're going to do to the Democratic Party leadership if they don't get their way. You know? He's completely changed it. And where they will fit in to the world of Obama if he were to get elected becomes an interesting question.
I don't mean any disrespect against them either, but they are from another time, and I don't see any ideas there. And I'm not trying to pillory them for that, but I don't see any ideas, and I don't think any are going to be coming. I think that the main problem right now, when you talk about Cornel West, that hits it right on the head, because with Cornel West, he says this stuff, and the hegemonic and all, you know, it's said in certain words. And I don't want to get in trouble for this, because I don't feel like running down Jesse Jackson. I'm not going to be one of those people
we both qualified ourselves enough, I think, that we... Okay.
Right, but I think that a lot of the time, this is probably, I hate to say it, but I'm going to say it. I think a lot of Cornel West's audience appeal is based, like I think a lot of hip-hop's appeal, on the melody and the rhythm of what he's saying and the fact that he's a born performer rather than the substance of what he's saying. And what I'm working through at this point, and I really mean I'm working through it, I can't be glib about this, is that on the one hand, a black audience will listen to the right speaker like Barack Obama saying, to put it metaphorically, any fool can have a child, and they're mobbing him in the lobby. But then a lot of the very same people will listen to Cornel West. I'm sure that his clip from this special is already on YouTube, probably. And he'll be talking about hegemony, and he'll be slicing his hands through the air and bouncing up and down in his seat and doing that thing that he does. And a lot of the same people say, yeah, that brother's got something to say. Word, right. And so there's this schizophrenia. And that's why I say it seems that the consensus is that it's partly the system and it's partly us. I would like to see it tip to the point that, no, I hate saying this about Cornel West, but I wish people would listen to people like him and think that's a kind of a salute, that's something we can keep in our belly, that is a kind of a ritual. But what really needs to be thought about at this point is us doing our very best to change ourselves with what we've got when what we've got isn't perfect. I just hope that that's the case. Because, Cornel West's first pop book, sold 400 billion.
Oh, I know, that thing that came out
copies.
right after the Los Angeles riot? Race Matters.
Yeah, and Race Matters.
Title.
And, was that mostly because of the title? I was going to say, the title is a wonderful title. But, really, I don't know Cornel West's work as well as I know some others' work, but my sense from Cornel West is that he's taking a kind of a preacherly position and that he has some very broad-scale messages to teach us, but I don't see concrete advice about what we really need to do. And so that's a voice where I'm less interested in him than in, say, an Obama. I hope the black community would follow.
Well, let me take issue with you just a little bit. I mean, I think there's something in between. So I agree with you that there is this performance aspect to the appeal. I definitely agree with that because I feel it. I mean, when I've seen Cornel West give some of his amazing public addresses at the performance level, I mean, just
perorations,
and he's not a fool either. He's not stupid. He knows a lot of things.
No.
I saw him give a lecture at Princeton on philosophy. He was just speaking to a freshman introductory on the history of Western philosophy. It was absolutely stunning.
He's an erudite man.
I mean, everything from Hobbes to Descartes to Newton to Hume
he's
to
picking it out of
Kant.
the air.
I mean, he had woven it all together, and he infused it with such vitality. You had to run from the lecture hall and get those books immediately, is what you felt like after. And I've seen him address black church audiences where he delves deeply into the well, of the rhetorical traditions of the African American community, and he's got all the moves. And it's very powerful and effective, and people come out, tears in their eyes and all this kind of stuff. So yes, at that level. And also, I want to share some of your maybe lack of satisfaction with a lot of the airy and kind of not touching the ground rhetoric. I mean, half the time I don't know what he's talking about with some of this postmodern mumble jumble that he goes through. I can't quite figure out exactly what he's saying. Right. And my wife, Linda, goes ballistic every time she sees him because she says this man has a PhD in philosophy, religion. He's a professor at Princeton. Why doesn't he say something? That draws on his expertise instead of engaging in all this performance BS, which is what you're calling it?
That's a whole other thing.
But
right.
I don't want to go from rejecting that to just saying the only thing is pull up our socks for black people. And because whatever happened to the politics in between, where we talked about how big the welfare state was going to be, what the taxes were going to look like, what our urban policy, housing policy, support for low-income families, preschool, what we were going to do about education, all these kind of things, where I feel like a progressive critique of the received wisdom should still be possible, and is something in which to which somebody like a Cornel West, if only he would, could meaningfully contribute, or for that matter, like a Glenn Loury, if I want to talk about reform of, our prison system, et cetera. I want to allow for the possibility that there's something more than just telling black people to pull up our socks that needs to be done through politics to level the playing field.
Yeah. You've helped me with something here, because now I think I know what I kind of wish Cornel West would do. He gives all of that spiritual fire that gets you. I like watching him and listening to him too in itself, and he gets you to thinking about the system And he gets you to thinking, I guess if you listen hard enough, you can hear how the philosophers are teaching us how to keep our heads above water and to keep moving forward with our Chekhovian irony and our ironic hope, as he puts it, despite, and I think the implication is, despite what the system is doing to us. I wish that he would put that spiritual fire into actually telling people what we can do to make the system work for us. I wish he'd spread it around more. Larry Elder has a thing he says. Larry Elder is the black libertarian Los Angeles radio host. He's often on the list of black conservatives that many people consider so evil. And Larry Elder did say to me one time, and yes, I met him, one thing about Cornel West. He said that back after the L.A. riots, he would encounter people saying that they had read Race Matters. And he said, okay, so what did it say? And he says, they say, well, and they couldn't really say what the book said. I know what that means, and it's not that he wrote a bad book, but what message do you carry away from a Cornel West talk after you're finished enjoying the performance? And that's what I would like to see more focused
in a way, this is not unlike my criticism of Jesse Jackson in the political realm. I mean, I wish Cornel would sit down and actually get serious about his intellectual work and actually follow through and bring it into some kind of fruition. And not just live so much off of his celebrity, which is easy to do, and the kind of ambulance chase. I mean, that puts it unkindly, but you know what I mean. Every event that's any event you have to be at, and you're kind of, it kind of pulls you away from seriously thinking things through to their conclusion. Because I agree with you about the spiritual. I mean, what did he call it?
Ironic?
That's certainly irony, and Chekhovian irony is part of his thing, and hope in the face of despair is part of the thing. But the negative, the nihilism, that was the word. The kind of deprivation of spiritual centeredness and grounding in the lives of people, such that they get reduced to merely hedonistic pursuit of their pleasures, or living, only for the day, or caught up in horrible violence and, degradation in the nature of their lives and their relationships and so forth and so on. I mean, because, you got to face it. I mean, a crack house, okay? A crack house is a place of unimaginable degradation. Human standard, because, of course, it's not. I'm just saying, to the extent that a blight of this kind of thing is going on disproportionately in a community, you have to ask these kind of questions. And for Cornel to start there, and then to try to, so what do we do now? And so how do we move forward? And what, this is getting very Cosby-esque, isn't it? What is the minister supposed to do? What are your, parents supposed to do? How do communities...
Exactly.
This is what community organizing is about, I might add.
Precisely. Precisely. It is.
It's about helping people empower themselves by getting them into some situation where they feel that agency is meaningful, where they can actually act effectively on behalf of things, and they can be aware of themselves in ways, and then begin to address their own shortcomings, as well as pressuring the larger world for so forth and so on. So,
of course.
Yeah. Let's talk about that New Yorker cover before we run out of time.
Yeah, before we run out, let's do that. Is it funny?
Well, no, I didn't laugh when I saw it. I wasn't outraged by it, though.
It's clever, isn't it?
It's clever. It's a piece of satire, and it wasn't hard for me to see that it was a send up of some corner, or maybe it's more than a corner of the American political culture that have all of these suspicions and these kind of problems with Obama.
And the question is, why are we so worried about the kind of person who would look at that cover and not get the joke and think that it was just a pictorial representation of the truth? Because not only do we all know that person wouldn't vote for Obama anyway, that point is boring. The main point is, let's say that there are these people sitting in their living room, they're going to look at that cover, and they're actually going to say, yep, he's a Muslim, she's a terrorist. Okay, there are supposedly some people like that, although I'd be interested to see how successful it would be if people actually tried to root out some people like that. But let's say that there's some people like that. I'm not sure why we're obsessing so much over them, because what power do they have? Are they going to join together and start, trying to round up people? It seems that there is this perfectionism that we have when it comes to, in particular, racial questions. If that had been a cover with John Edwards' depicted in some sort of silly, imagine this way. This is what people say about him, imagine if it were true, that vein of humor. I don't think people would be so upset. It's right back to race and our sense that we must treat it as a taboo. Why are we so worried about the minority of people whose sense of humor is so underdeveloped that they would think that that cover is just a simple picture?
Well, what I think is going on is it's not so much a direct calculation that a certain number of people are going to see the cover and then take it literally and not get the joke and be reconfirmed in their bigotry. That's not it. What I think it is that there's a tacit understanding about where the boundaries of legitimate expression lie. Mm-hmm. You know, we were talking about the N-word earlier and who can say it and when. Mm-hmm. And this is about a lot of things. I mean, portraying a female public figure in a way that makes inappropriate use of, sexuality maybe would be another example. And,
of course,
where we could think of, well, did they have to show all that cleavage, or why did they, or whatever. And what it is that, people are afraid that a breach, whatever the intent of, David Remnick and Rick Hertzberg and, guys at Men and Women at the New Yorker may have been, whatever their intent, people are afraid that the effect of this breach of a kind of understood boundary will be to, weaken the boundary and make it possible for others. So, there are many things that are like this, like anti-Semitism, okay?
Yeah.
What can and can't be said about the possible multiplicity of motives of American Jews who have influence over American policy and who also have a fealty or admiration and personal concern about the state of Israel? I just give that as an example. There's a boundary there somewhere that people are, and not just American Jews, assiduous in policing themselves, censoring themselves, out of a sense of civility, out of a sense of a desire to maintain.
One must have that.
This kind. Well, I think we do have it. I just think it's a natural thing, and first of all, there's an election going on, and people are worried that it'll hurt him. But beyond that, I think people are worried, if the New Yorker can run this, what does this say about where the boundary is about what can and can't be said? As I've said here before, you can't even say Barack Obama's name.
I know.
You cannot say Barack Hussein Obama, which is his name.
Yeah, and this is taboo. It's getting a little bit medieval. Lee Siegel in the Times recently said, well, suppose that it showed a black man eating watermelon and raping a white woman. Obviously, that's beyond the pale for all sorts of reasons. Whereas in this case, what we see is a black man who's in Muslim garb and doing a little fist gesture with his wife, who is dressed in the garb of a kind of a cross between Angela Davis and Huey Newton. All of this is cartoonishly absurd, as is the flag burning in the fireplace and the Osama bin Laden on the wall. The idea is that that's taboo. That's something that's so clearly ridiculous, departs from reality that sharply, and is not about society-wide stereotypes that must concern us. The idea that we would worry that Michelle Obama might secretly have a kind of a fondness for the Black Panthers and be ready to inculcate her children in that. It's all so absurd that if this is going to be taboo, then what we're really saying is that it's taboo to twit any black public figure for any reason. And I don't want to go there.
No, I agree with you 100%. I don't think the New Yorker cartoon, or I should say cover, was out of bounds. And I would, defend. I mean, I think you're exactly right, that it was so over the top in the stuff that was being shown that you knew that it was not a literal thing on the Obamas, but rather it was an indirect thing on how certain people see the Obamas.
Exactly.
You should have known that just from glancing. With the watermelon, you might have had a harder time seeing it in that light. You might have said, no, man, they're just playing into base stereotypes instead of making fun of the base stereotypes.
Right.
So I agree with that. And there's a danger of backlash here. It's an obvious point. But many people if the people who have in this media-driven campaign the controlling the portals of image production are so obviously self-conscious in their protective efforts that it becomes a kind of thing that people will look at it and they will say, oh my, they'll turn on the television and they'll hear the same old complaint about damaging Obama by doing this or by doing that in circumstances where people are going to say, well, that's fair game. I mean, look what they did to, and then name any other politician that you can name, and they've been lampooned in one way or another. Mm-hmm. Then the possibility is that people will react negatively to that, and the whole thing will backfire. Although, that's not a very deep point.
Well, we shall see. But I've been very distressed by that because there's been a little part of me that's considered, are all these people who so aggrieved really incapable of getting it? Is it that there's a certain brand of humor that is less widespread than I thought? But I think that no, because the Colbert Report is very popular. Their 30 Rock the sitcom is very popular. People get that humor, and so clearly there's something more going on.
Well, it's a very elitist argument to say only the people who live in the Upper West Side of New York get a New Yorker cover. I mean, come on.
Oh, no, I don't mean that it's developed. I just mean that it's a brand, that there's a certain type of humor that has settled in among, and I thought, is this humor limited? Like, is it that only, that Upper West Side people get that humor, but that it hasn't been exposed to other people in the country? And then I thought, no, the whole country understands that wing of humor, I think, except for this occasional person who hasn't been watching TV or something. And that's when I thought, okay, there must be something more going on. It's not that only 10,000 people understand the cartoon. You see what I mean?
Yeah,
and so
I see what you mean.
I think people do get it. It's just that people seem to feel that an exception has to be made even if they do get it. So it's just been interesting to watch the debate.
So I saw an interesting piece last week. This is apropos of Barack Obama's trip abroad by Charles Krauthammer.
Mm-hmm.
Did you see it? I mean,
I haven't read a Krauthammer piece over the past week.
Okay,
no.
So here's what he says. I can tell you in a nutshell. I'm interested in what you think about this argument. He basically says the question used to be, who is Barack Obama? Now the question is, who does Barack Obama think he is? Okay, now this is apropos of boundaries and what kind of things can be said in public and what kind of criticisms are or not over the line. And we just decided that the New Yorker cover, which in its first instance wasn't a criticism of Obama, but in any case was not over the line. And I'm wondering what you think about this. So it's basically, so that's the theme. The theme is the question used to be, who is Barack Obama? We don't know who he is. Now the question is, who does he think he is? And it's about Obama's planning to speak or desire of the campaign to have the Brandenburg Gate in Berlin as a venue for a major public address by Obama while he's in Germany. So, much of this trip is about the optics, a word that I've learned recently from commentators on television as they talk about the photos that are beamed in by satellite to scores of millions of Americans, which in and of themselves, that is, images, are going to shift Barack Obama from being somebody not trusted and with whom you feel comfortable being commander-in-chief and head of state and person on who's in charge of our relations with the rest of the world, to being someone whom you do trust, and you're going to do that because you see him with sitting with Karzai, or sitting with Maliki, or sitting with Petraeus, and you say, he's a hefty fellow. Which, this is done by images. This is done just by seeing photographs on the thing. Anyway, so the people in control of the images think maybe the Brandenburg Gate would make for a good image, and Krauthammer's point is you have to earn the Brandenburg Gate. This is what he says. He says, when Reagan spoke there, it was as the Cold War was coming to an end and the Soviet Union was collapsing, and the standoff between the West and the Soviet bloc that had been going on for 2 generations was coming to an end, in part because of the steadfast leadership of Ronald Reagan, blah, blah, blah. And when John F. Kennedy spoke there in the early 1960s, it was in the time of airlifts to Berlin, the real possibility of nuclear war between the United States and the Soviet Union, a NATO and U.S. commitment to go to war to protect a divided Germany, and so forth and so on. Now here comes Barack Obama just a couple of years ago, not even in the Senate of the United States, without very much of real substance or accomplishment to his name. And he wants to stand before a large crowd at the Brandenburg Gate so that American reporters can compare him in their flowery reports to John F. Kennedy and Ronald Reagan speaking in the same venue. No, says Krauthammer. Who do you think you are? he says. And I thought, I'm just going to reveal, that he had a point about that. And I wonder what you think.
Wow, that's interesting. No, I don't like that. And I think my first response is that if Kennedy had, Lord forbid, if the life of Kennedy ended right after his speech before the Brandenburg Gate, I'm not sure that anybody would remember him as having been a particularly massive figure. There was a bit of opportunistic symbolism even then, despite the events that were surrounding Kennedy. It would be hard to argue that what he had done was necessarily one for the books yet at that point.
Well, he had gotten himself elected president of the United States, which Barack Obama hasn't yet done.
Yeah,
but I take your point. I take your point.
And also, let's think about how John F. Kennedy became president, although no one knew that as much then. But more to the point, let's say that these guys, those first two, earned it. Nevertheless, now the Brandenburg Gate, for that reason, is a resonant symbol, and I think it's perfectly legitimate to make yourself a speech before you've become president and before you've done much of anything, in order to indicate that you realize, and I think both of us would agree, that these are times when certain very large issues are looming. There are many things going on where if we don't do anything about it now, then we may be in serious trouble in the future. And so there's, of course, the Middle East, and there's the environment, there's our own banking crisis if you want to get local about it. And I think that it makes sense to be there to say, we now think of this as a place with a great historic resonance, and I am now going to use this background with its historical resonance in order to lend a grandeur to the things that I'm going to say. And I think that from now on, we can have plenty of people using the Brandenburg Gate.
You mean the Brandenburg Gate as a venue for American politicians has been earned by the historical developments such as they are, and is available to anybody, John McCain included, should circumstances conspire to have him standing there. And there isn't any such thing as, you earn the right to stand there because pretty much...
all right, here's a little more, though. If you're going to do a speech before the Brandenburg Gate, you better do a good one. That's another thing. So it can't be somebody getting up there and just saying some stuff. But I imagine that we have seen that Obama has a way of saying good things. He's going to get into the speech books. So he's not going to waste the opportunity.
He has a way of giving good speeches. But I'm disturbed by this idea that we can manufacture gravitas through set design.
I don't think it's that. It's that the set design is only part of it. I assume that he will speak well before such settings as this. It's not that he's going to use that to elevate what would otherwise be mundane. I imagine he's making a speech which would sound good if he did it in front of a Woolworths in Muncie, Indiana. But then he's going to have this added benefit of this backdrop. And he's going to be a little bit theatrical, but this is the era of YouTube. Well, we can play this stuff at home.
Let me tell you why I resonate with Neil Kahn, Charles Krauthammer on this issue a little bit. Because I'm thinking about the convention in Denver and the acceptance speech, which is going to be given in a big stadium on literally the 45th anniversary of the day that Martin Luther King spoke in front of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963, that famous I Have a Dream speech. And, of course, the media people are already all over this comparison of King's address in 1963 and Obama's address in Washington and Obama's address in Denver, respectively, in 2008, as if somehow a cycle has been completed or some wheel has come full circle or there's some cosmic alignment between these events. And what I want you to know, and I know we don't have a whole lot of time and maybe we can take this up, I'm happy to hear your response, though. What I want you to know is that I resent that. I resent the easy appropriation of King 1963. I don't think the phenomenon of Barack Obama, as important as it is to American politics, warrants to be compared to the culmination of the sit-ins, the dogs with the hoses, although some of that came later. But the whole thing that goes back to the founding of the NAACP and before, I don't feel. I feel like that is something that's a manipulative thing that image managers are foisting on the country, and it's not deeply historically resonant to me. And I object to the appropriation of the symbol in that way.
And I think we are about to run over our time. But I think that I don't have any kind of verdict on that until 4 or maybe 8 years have gone by. And that is allowing that Obama did become president, because there's now and then there's what things are going to look like historically, and historically we very well may look back at 2008 and 2009 as when something really did change, even though nobody now who's setting up cameras and writing speeches has any way of knowing whether that's the case. But there may be a certain historical justness to it, or there very well may be not, and this may just be 2008 and 2009, in which case, yes, the idea of comparing Barack Obama making a speech before a backdrop, or Barack Obama making a speech in Denver at the convention, has the gravitas of what King did or people before him did. That certainly might end up looking rather tinny.
Okay.
But I think we might be surprised.
Let's talk about this next time we talk. But here, let me put the question a little bit different. Are African Americans so weak and in lack of control of their own agenda that matters of this kind get to be decided by a single individual's political campaign and not by a reflective deliberation amongst African Americans on the meaning of our historical experience and so forth? Because I don't remember being asked whether or not I wanted to turn over the sort of metaphorical power of the African American experience to anybody's presidential campaign, even that of someone as impressive as Barack Hussein Obama. I don't remember voting about that. Somehow it's just happened.
But you're the one who said that black people don't, in the true sense, constitute a single community.
I did say that. Correct.
And so how would that rational discussion have taken place anyway? So don't we need some sort of external catalyst? That's just my final thought on that. We should pick it up in our next.
Yeah, let's take it up. Let's take it up. I think it's a tough question, but I think it's an interesting thing that's happening, and I'm not entirely comfortable with it. But yeah.
I get it.
John, it's a pleasure.
Always a pleasure, Glenn, and let's pick it up in a week or 3.
We will not be short of topics, I'm sure.
Never are.
Take care, my friend.
Okay. See you soon.
Bye.